Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
Hey everybody, I think we're live. Thanks for joining me today. It's Debbie Levitt of Delta CX, and let's see, today is, does anyone know what day it is? Wednesday, April 15th. We're live on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Everybody get ready to ask me your questions. I'm going to start opening up the chat rooms, and today we're going to do things a little bit differently because for my UX and Agile presentation, I have a number of slides that I'm going to be showing you, and of course, giving you the presentation. But I've got about 40 slides, and you know that can take an hour on its own. So what I'd like to do is, since the slides are broken into 5 chapters or kind of sub-chapters of the UX and Agile topic, what I'll do is I will stop where each chapter is and I'll just check the chat rooms for any questions or comments. It does mean that we're probably going to run longer than an hour, so I understand some people may need to drop in and drop out as time allows. Of course, this is always archived in the YouTube channel, so join us on deltacx.tv is a redirect over to the YouTube channel. You can subscribe there and click that bell icon so that you know when I go live there. And so welcome to the people who are watching. So as I was saying, this is going to be a bit of a long presentation because I have lots of slides on this topic. But what I'll do is I'll stop every subchapter and see where people have questions. So let me get all my screens ready and let's give this a try. All right, now I just need to get to my PowerPoint stuff. Okay, there we go. Hey, everybody. So this is from my Delta CX workshop, which is a work in progress. I took my Delta CX book. I've made it into an interactive workshop, and I've been adding stuff to it. So there's lots of content that isn't in the book because the book came out last year, and I've had some new ideas since then. So these are some remodeled slides on Agile, and I love doing this podcast with all of you guys because then I get to test drive these slides and see what your questions are and see how I can make them better. Hey, UX! So let's take a look. And like I said, I'll stop each subchapter and see if people have questions. And let's jump in. So what's up with Agile? Do you ever feel like that? So, and remember, since this comes in the middle of a workshop, I'm going to make reference to things that you would have seen earlier in the workshop that you didn't. For example, this chapter comes after my chapter on why Lean UX is a terrible book and how we can really be lean, which will be my podcast in 2 weeks. Join in then. So in some things you'll hear me say, it implies that I've already taught you something. So just remember, this is a piece of a larger workshop. So earlier in our adventures, we showed the 4 main values of Agile from a document called the Agile Manifesto, which was written in early 2001. The values are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And the Agile Manifesto also came not just with 4 values, but with 12 principles. And while they weren't written with CX or UX in mind, some of them do support our work, such as Principle 1. Remember, this is Agile Manifesto. Principle 1, our highest priority is customer satisfaction. That's directly linked to how valuable, delightful, easy to learn, easy to use, and life-improving our product is. Principle 5, give motivated individuals the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. You've got to hire great CX workers and give them trust in what they need. Principle 9, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. Design matters, make it great. And my favorite, Principle 10, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. When CX kills or changes features, we're often seen as the bad guys. But engineering and others should support our efforts to create less work for you by creating simpler or fewer features, or by eliminating projects that are wrong for the company or team to undertake. The main problems between UX and Agile can be summed up with this slide. First, we have UX being a square peg someone's either trying to hammer into a round hole or it's being taken off the board and thrown away for not fitting in. Siloed, excluded. We work differently than engineering. We have a different process, different goals and tasks. But I always hear, why can't UX people design as engineers are sitting next to them and coding what they're designing? The answer is similar to why QA doesn't test the code as the developer writes each line. But we'll unpack this more during this larger chapter. So the first problem is that engineering often wants to ignore how CX and UX work are done and hammer it into how engineering does their work. This makes as much sense as demanding that your heart doctor and your lung doctor work exactly the same way as each other. They should do the same things. Their tests and processes should take the same amount of time, and they should replace each other if one of them takes a vacation. It doesn't work for specialized doctors, and it doesn't work on our teams. Put it this way. Agilists deciding what CX or UX does, who does the work, how much time we get, and the like, makes as much sense as a group of UX designers getting together and dictating how engineers will do their work, what tasks they will do, which engineering work can be done by others who can do it good enough, and how much time they'll get. And engineers will need to please fit their tasks into the user-centered design process. Thank you. Second, have you ever heard of the no true Scotsman fallacy? It's when you dismiss criticisms by appealing to the purity of something. That's what people do every time I say, well, here's how UX and CX can fit into Agile really well, and someone says, that's not Agile. Or I say UX should be weeks ahead of coders since we're researching, designing, and testing what engineers will build, and someone says, that's not lean. We have to stop acting like Agile or Scrum or Lean has this flawless purity that will be ruined if a different role with a different process joins the team. Part of Agile seems to be to figure out what Agile is and to keep fine-tuning it for what works for your teams and product. And Scrum seems to go back and forth. UX is important and should be on the team, but if those people aren't around or handy, let anybody do the UX work. I interviewed a Scrum Master and trainer for my book. He told me, quote, engineers should be able to tackle UX work. I'm not going to say they're going to be awesome at it, but they should be able to tackle that work, end quote. So I asked him, why would we give work to people who wouldn't be awesome at it? And he said, and this is a long quote, so I have it over 3 bullet points, quote, because the work may need to get done. If the cost of delay outweighs the cost of getting it wrong, then it's more important for that team to deliver on the value for the customer. It may not be the best UX, but if it takes a user's task from 6 hours to 2 hours rather than the awesome 20 minutes that the UX expert would get, then it may still be worth that investment. He continued, how likely is it that an organization like Microsoft can find 40 plus UX experts for each team, or Salesforce who have over 300 teams? I would rather have working software than a delay in delivery. And if the UX experts have shared knowledge, well then at least the rest of the engineering team should be able to proceed while they're on vacation without shooting themselves in the foot. And finally, he finished with, that means that any team member, including UX, should be able to go on vacation for a month, as often happens in Europe, and the product doesn't fall apart. They can still deliver features on their regular cadence. Well, quick explanation of this image. This is from an old Saturday Night Live sketch about a driving cat. At the end of every sketch, the cat drives the passengers off a cliff, and the catchphrase is, see? Toonsis the cat can drive, just not very well. That's what flashes in my head when someone says, well, we have working software. The software works, just not very well. Companies need to redefine working software. If it's functional but lacks customer value, doesn't solve customer problems, or is a good idea that was designed poorly, your customers won't take much solace from it being functional. We need to raise our standards. What might pass as a working car would be far from safe, comfortable, efficient, and the feature-rich cars most of us have now. We also need to be careful about false choices. Our only choices aren't working software or delaying delivery. Our only choices aren't either this gets delayed or it gets done potentially wrong by non-experts. Additionally, I'm absolutely sure that there is no shortage of CX and UX talent looking for new jobs, even before the pandemic. We should not make the false assumption that Salesforce, Microsoft, or any other company will never be able to find all of the qualified CX workers they need, so they'll need to allow engineers on the Scrum team to do UX tasks because that's better than nothing. Would a Scrum Master with some engineers out sick feel it's okay for UX designers to do some coding or QA testing because it's better to say some coding and testing got done than to have to delay and wait for your experts? Let's make sure that we're not defining working software as, hey, it functions in some way, but as it works for customers. It works for customers by matching their needs, pain points, and frustrations. It takes their tasks and jobs to be done into account and solves their problems before they have problems, preferably. That's working software. Now, that's the end of the first subchapter of this. I'm just going to switch over and see if I have any questions. Stephen says, new layout is great. Stephen, your new picture is great. Let's see, anything from YouTube? Nothing there. So I will continue with the next chapter. Oh, I see. LinkedIn is still behind a minute. So as I go along, guys, just type any questions or comments you have as I go, and I'll stop where each of the subchapters end, and we'll take a look at what questions or comments you have. So knowing that we have about 40 minutes of slides, I'm going to keep going with the next content. And let's see, here's me on the screen. Here's my PowerPoint back in my control. Okay, next subchapter. As we dive in, I'm going to use Safe Agile in some of my examples, but please know that everything I tell you can be adapted to any methodology or flavor of Agile. Some examples will be more specific to Safe, but with most variations of Agile getting CX and UX wrong, most of what I say will translate across Agile approaches. Also, since most Agile methodologies use the term UX, where I've been shifting to CX, you'll hear me say UX a lot more in this chapter to match what Agile tends to say. So in 2014, during 4 days of Safe Agile training, I asked more than once, how does UX fit into your model? Safe admitted at the time they had no idea how UX fit into their model and told me if I figure it out, I should let them know. Wasn't in their infographics or training material. Well, a few years after my training, SAFE put into their materials, quote, the basic structure of UX within the SAFE framework includes a UX architect on the portfolio team, information architects on the program team, and one UX designer on each feature team. Each individual works with the entire UX team, but also across disciplines on their own respective team. Now, it sounds like they're not totally clear on certain UX titles and the way that we might define them, but at least they had us on the teams. They had us as partners, collaborators, and teammates at all levels of the Agile experience. But that unfortunately evolved, because that would have been great if the story ends there, but it doesn't. As of a few years ago, they changed how UX fits into the Safe Agile model because they stumbled on the Lean UX book. So now it says things like, Agile teams and UX designers accept the reality that the right answer is unknowable upfront. Really? I don't remember accepting that. Do you? It sounds like they're falling into the, well, we can't know everything, so let's just decide we can't know anything, logical fallacy. Meanwhile, their claim is completely false. With a great cadence of CX research, design, testing, and iteration, we can know the best design our company is capable of creating at this time before engineering begins. So, back a few years ago in SAFe version 4.5, since they do versioning, they attempted to solve the problem of UX specialists being siloed or not collaborating well. Sadly, their suggestion is that UX workers, who they acknowledge as specialized and trained, be removed from the process. They empower agile teams to do their own lean UX. SAFe had completely remodeled how UX fits into their agile approach by following the lean UX book. An aspirology, it's a word I made up, meaning a methodology that aspires to something but fails. An aspirology that removes UX's power, autonomy, and specialty, replacing us with endless team exercises with everything designed and decided by committee. And again, for you listening on the podcast, I'll be doing April 27th podcast on why the Lean UX book is so terrible and how we can truly be lean. So when I saw SAFe doing this and making this change, I decided to make good on their original request for me to tell them when I figured out how it fits in, and I emailed them and said they're going in the wrong direction. I was already seeing the carnage from their new approach when it was being brought into workplaces where I was working. I explained in my email that there are huge negative outcomes for culture, product, customer satisfaction, and more when you remove or minimize UX specialists. SAFe's response was that I needed to learn more about Lean UX, and they linked to the page on their site that I had already read multiple times. Once again, we see the dangers of the Lean UX book blindly adopted without critical thinking. So in SAFe version 4.5, which again is a couple years old now, I'll show you the newer ones shortly, UX gets a little recycle your garbage icon on the bottom left. Let's see, where am I pointing? The bottom left. On the bottom left with milestones and system team. We're in some sort of island of misfit toys off to the side that seems to be outside of the processes. This doesn't tell me or anybody what's UX? How does it work? How does it work with us? Are they on the team or not? Are they in sprints? And just to drive this mess home, let's go back to what SAFe had declared just a couple of years before they came out with this. The basic structure, says quote, the basic structure of UX within the SAFe framework includes a UX architect on the portfolio team, information architects on the program team, and one UX designer, I guess that's right here, I'm still working on my pointing, one UX designer on each feature team. We were included at every level, and now they seem to have no idea where we fit in. When I show this to some people, I often hear, well, SAFe is a joke. Maybe or maybe not, but it's hard to find any agile information or training going deeply into how you work with UX, the people designing what engineering will build. And very rarely does this agile training actually come from a CX or UX expert. So again, it would be like me, a CX or UX expert, teaching engineering. So this helpful infographic is SAFe version 4.5 from a few years ago, but let's get to know it better and where it's evolved to today, because I think that will help us understand why there seem to be so many disconnects between UX and Agile. How did we go from being an important partner and collaborator at every level to being mostly taken off the teams, out of the process, put in a silo, and replaced by engineering who will do our work? Version 4.5 of the SAFe Agile framework says that while UX experts used to be in charge of the design process, this was too siloed. So let's take a look. Their quote was, traditionally, UX design has been an area of specialization. People who have an eye for design, a feel for user interaction, and specialty training were often entirely in charge of the design process. End quote. Well, other than the condescension, it sounds pretty good to me. Specialized UX practitioners should be in charge of their own design process. Yes, please. Well, SAFe continues, quote, the goal was pixel-perfect early designs done in advance of the implementation. Usually this work was in silos, apart from the very people who knew the most about the system and its context, end quote. Okay, this still sounds pretty good other than the silos, but notice that to SAFe, these are statements of problems, not statements of how things should be. They use statements like this to try to explain why it's okay for non-UX specialists to do UX work. Well, where else does your company like to put untrained non-specialists on software development teams? And why would untrained non-specialists imagine they can do UX work? Notice the I for design and the feel for user interaction. These words are carefully chosen to minimize UX experts. You wouldn't say an expert cardiologist just has a feel for working with the human heart. You wouldn't say your senior developer, gosh golly gee, they sure have an eye for working with programming languages. Those people might find those phrases disrespectful. But those words are there to help Agile team members who self-assess as having an eye for design and a feel for user interaction decide they're perfectly qualified to do UX work. SAFe appears to believe specialty training really isn't needed as long as you have eyes and feels. SAFe continues by quoting the Lean UX book. Quote, "Lean UX literally has no time for heroes. The entire concept of design as hypothesis immediately dethrones notions of heroism. As a designer, you must expect that many of your ideas will fail in testing. Heroes don't admit failure, but Lean UX designers embrace it as part of the process." End quote. This whole setup is false. Heroes don't admit failure? Has anybody watched a Marvel movie lately? What kind of book is this again? We can be low-ego action heroes and admit failure. Those lacking the ability to admit failure are often egotistical and or narcissistic, but that's separate from how heroic someone might be. So in general, I dislike setups like this, since you walk away thinking, I don't want to be a hero because I can admit failure. I'm telling you, you can be a low-ego action hero, save the day, find and solve problems, and admit and embrace failure. This quote is about how UX practitioners can't fall in love with their designs and must be ready for user testing to possibly invalidate hypotheses. UX testing might show flaws in a design or concept, and we must be ready to change and iterate rather than try to act like what we did was perfect. Good UX specialists will embrace the failure, learn from it, and build something better, all before developers write a line of code. But SAFe misunderstood this quote and took it as a dramatic shift in whether or not UX practitioners are needed. They're not heroes. We must not need them. It gets more bizarre as SAFe recommends, quote, Agile teams apply Principle 2, apply systems thinking, to their Lean UX design activities, moving from a siloed specialist approach to a collaborative cross-functional design model. Agile teams and ARTs, which is the Agile Release Train, are ideally suited for this model, which should include all of the design, build, test, cross-functional skills. Now, I always noticed that in many of the things on the SAFe site, they don't say specialist without saying siloed. And by putting those together, you go, no, we don't want silos, so I guess we don't want a siloed specialist. We do want specialists. We don't want silos. And SAFe Agile also says, this is one of my favorite quotes, don't forget to, quote, include the design perspectives of product management, system architecture, business owners, information security, operations, and shared services, end quote. The design perspectives. So that means we've gone from having UX do all of the product design to having UX seemingly do none of it. We're not even included on this list of roles with which you should collaborate. Include the design perspectives of everybody at the company except CX and UX pros. So back to that diagram. of SAFe. Now, this is actually a diagram of SAFe's newest version, version 5.0, as of when I'm recording this. But in between 4.5 and 5.0, they had 4.6. And for that, they started waving the Lean UX Center of Excellence flag. This appears to make a UX a consultant that either an agile team sometimes works with, or a consultant who's responsible to teach, train, or coach the Agile team in their UX activities and tasks. Just making a note here, sorry. And what I've noticed is that whenever a model declares UX to be an outside consultant or a subject matter expert rather than embedded or part of the team, UX ends up treated as people you just don't collaborate with much. Maybe we'll come to them with a question now and then. I want to make sure everybody is thinking critically and noticing that SAFe's approach to UX creates and fosters silos. This means that SAFe's approach to solving silos creates the siloing they claim to not want. Those UX people, so siloed, make sure they're not part of the team. Ask everybody but UX for design perspectives. Treat UX as an outside consultant. So looking again at the screen at the SAFe 5.0 infographic, let's take a look at where all the pieces ended up now. Lean UX is still an icon now in a right side sidebar of sorry, we still don't really totally know what to do with all of these things. And the Agile team still seems to have nobody from UX there, just a product owner and a bunch of unnamed people icons. But this newer version is worse. Someone decided to play buzzword bingo and slap customer centricity and design thinking in the middle of this. That still doesn't explain what is that? Who does it? What does it mean? How does it fit in with this or other parts of the diagram? Are these people on the team? Are they separate people? With Lean UX off to the side in the penalty box, it still looks like the engineers will be doing some sort of design thinking. Who else is in this box, in this diagram? Product owner, DevOps, solutions architects, and the Scrum Master? I guess they're doing design thinking? Design thinking is mostly meaningless, as you know from earlier in this workshop. Again, workshop. But notice customer centricity isn't even at the top. Neither the portfolio vision nor the high-level focus on value streams seems to have anything to do with customer centricity. Are we coming up with solutions and features before we get to customer centricity? Does this mean we sprinkle on some customer centricity later or at the end? Ultimately, SAFe is one of many flavors of software development that demonstrates fairly honestly that they don't really understand CX, UX, or customer centricity. SAFe declares that Agile teams doing what they call collaborative UX design and implementation significantly improves business outcomes and time to market. What business outcomes does this improve? And how did they validate that their approach improves business outcomes? Hey, UX and CX like real, non-manipulated, preferably qualitative data. So I'd like to see how they arrived at that conclusion. Well, let's take a look at some desired results that DevOps has. I love to look at DevOps stuff. It just makes me so happy. Let's see which DevOps results are likely to improve when UX is removed from product design and software development processes and/or Agile teams are heavily mostly doing the UX design and work. How about product quality? Right there at the top of my infographic. Product quality might not improve in the eyes of the customer. SAFe's methodology appears to include no user research or nearly no user research, no voice of the customer. How will we build a product that our customer feels has high quality if we're not including the user in the process? Shorter time to market could happen if agile teams run with an early idea or skip UX testing. Sure, then you can build really fast and get something out, but did you build the right product for the customer? If this is the only metric a business used to determine a positive outcome, then let's slice a bunch of teams at your company. We'll really be moving fast when all of those people are gone. Well, we don't have to QA anymore. They're slowing us down. Productivity and efficiency should decrease when you are asking agile teams to do work outside of their job descriptions, work they might not be naturally talented at. Dumping product design on the agile team and excluding UX specialists should lead to teams with less time to do what they were hired to do: develop, QA test, or other engineering role. The agile team trying to take on lean UX is going to have less time for their story points, the work they were hired to do. How about the ability to build the right product? Hold on. Well, that should plunge. Deciding which features get built is best when it's a collaboration between product and UX. UX is very often the main advocate for customers' needs, motivations, and natural behaviors. Remove UX from this, and you're moving farther away from building the right product for the customer. How about customer satisfaction? Well, that might measurably decline with no advocate and with engineering teams doing UX work they're untrained and unqualified to do. Agile teams might be guessing their way to what might work for customers. Two more aren't on the screen, but let's talk about them. Corporate culture and communication. That'll be a downgrade under SAFe. What will the corporate culture be like when engineering teams go from misunderstanding UX and circumventing the designs they receive to mostly or wholly excluding UX? The solution to previously poor communication isn't no communication. It isn't the exclusion of important, expert, well-trained teammates. And how about shorter time between fixes? You often see that as an engineering goal, and that's an interesting one. If you keep time between fixes short, but you have more fixes because the UX is poor, or your agile team keeps changing their mind about what they'll build, did you achieve this goal or not? Luckily, all of these are measurable. So if you're measuring your PSE, which is what I call your product, services, and experiences, everything your company offers, by more than does it work and did we release it, then you'll know when a flavor or variation of Agile just isn't working. Some of these are rarely measured, which is why we can still tell ourselves that Agile works just fine. But it's deeply broken. Now that brings us to the end of another sub-chapter, so I'm going to flip over and see what some of our questions and comments are. There's none in YouTube, but it looks like we've got some stuff in LinkedIn, so I'm just going to refresh the page since sometimes I don't see things until I refresh the page. I'm so happy to see Jason here. Welcome, Jason. Let's see. Yelena says, what to do in a situation where capacity for UX research is limited, train developers to certain methods only, like usability testing, develop without research, wait until capacity is there, how to make the best out of a not ideal but temporary solution. Yelena, great question. I don't think I necessarily have my answer is we don't train anybody to do our jobs pretty much ever, but let me circle back to that after the slides and see if the slides cover any of that or if I need to add more slides. Now, Jason's been live tweeting here. Let's see what he says. The worst is architecting a solution from requirements when an agile team is already stood up to build features and they begin working on sprints without regard for our discovery process. Jason, I've got slides coming on that. Tail wagging the dog. Developers, in my opinion, should be downstream execution, not solutioning, unless it has to do with solving for technology challenges implied by the UX architecture or design. The tensions coming from solution architects who are threatened by UX architecture. UX must own the productization of technology, not dev. Jason certainly agree, and I think I've got some stuff coming on that, but we'll see what you think of it. Also, UI front-end developers feel, because they work in the display layer, that they can do UX and it's a bogus field. Well, sure, we've got a lot of problems with a lot of people thinking they can do UX. I've trained some companies where the business analysts were sure that they could do UX. Everybody seems to think they can do our job, and it just shows how little people understand what we do. Jason continues by saying, Dev are often in different org charts, so they don't want to be told how or what to build from another org. Yeah, that's obviously unfortunate. We need managers getting in there. Steven says, a rigorous explanation of the death of strategic UX in the Agile world, and, in my opinion, why product designers have become a thing. What are your thoughts on product designer title in the context of all this? Steven, I think that product designer came about as a more politically correct way to say UX UI designer. I don't think it's got anything to do with our problems with Agile. I think it was just more people coming up with like, oh, UX, UI, what are either of those? We don't know what that is, but we know what the product is, so we'll call it a product designer. Thanks, everybody, for the comments. These are great. I think some of them might help me change some slides later, but for now, let me continue going through my material, and I continue to welcome and appreciate your comments and questions as they go. And again, we'll circle back later and see what I didn't cover from some of your questions and comments. Okay, third subchapter. How does UX and CX fit in to Agile? So where does UX fit into Agile? So here I am using SAFE's old version 4.5 again, because even though it's a terrible infographic and it's not their latest version, it's a little clearer for their purpose. First of all, nobody puts UX in the corner. Here's where UX really lives. We should be here in portfolio land, involved in what we're building, why we're building it, and prioritizing what we're building. Not to take a job away from somebody in portfolio, but to be a collaborator. UX lives here in continuous exploration, the process of continually exploring the market and user needs and defining a vision, roadmap, and set of features that address those needs. Again, not to take that job away from program managers or product managers, but to collaborate with them. I don't know what this guy's doing here, but we're all about customer solutions completely. It's what we live for. Hey, I'd love to make DevOps better if I can. I would love to improve and enhance the culture. And CX and UX, we're all about decreasing failure rates, though I tend to be thinking more on the human experience level rather than the technical bug level. We certainly want shorter time between fixes, but we also want there to be fewer fixes. Better UX design earlier, fewer fixes later. And of course, one UX designer should be on the Agile team. That person represents the whole creative team and can circle back with visual designers, copywriters, researchers, and others involved in the UX process. We're all over this thing. People who aren't sure where UX fits into Agile generally don't understand what UX does and why they do it. But hopefully, if you're starting to get that now, you're the genius hero at your company. And the times they are a-changin'. This was from a 2017 TechCrunch article, just a screenshot of it. And it showed that many big tech companies are investing in hiring many more designers. So you can see from the infographic, if you're looking, or if you're listening to this later on the podcast, you can't see, but the infographic is showing things like Atlassian went from one designer to 25 developers, down to one designer to 9 developers. And again, these are 2017 numbers for the ending figures. Intercom has 5 developers for every designer. IBM went from 72 developers to 1 designer, down to 8 developers for 1 designer. Now, these ratios look pretty close to me. If you imagine the size of a single cross-functional software development team, then it makes sense for there to be an average of 1 designer per team. You no longer have 1 UX practitioner trying to juggle what 72 developers are coding. But we still have more to go. There are definitely, there's room for improvement, and I think we can do even better with our ratios of designers to developers. It probably should end up being closer to 1-to-1 in some cases. So what does this look like? CX should be part of Agile sprints, but we're going to have to start ahead of engineers. Whether your sprints are 1 or 2 weeks or some other cycled block of time, my research confirmed this is the way to go if you're trying to put UX into the Agile framework. CX must be at least 2 sprints ahead or more. This graphic envisions that we are 4 sprints ahead. So I've got a kind of a graphic on the screen showing that UX worked on sprint, what I call just A, B, C, D, before engineering started with A. Again, it could be sprint 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. I just want to show things in blocks and not get too bogged down by how people number or name things. So we could be 4 sprints ahead. Yes, that can be lean and agile. Don't claim it's not pure enough. If QA is going to test what dev is building 2 sprints from now, few of us would declare, oh, QA, they're not lean or agile. Let's please make the best of the assembly line and stop telling each other you're not agile or lean enough. Planning has to be in place so that CX and UX can start ahead of engineering. If you wait until sprint 0 or 1, engineers will expect to have a prioritized backlog of work. That might not come until UX has something tested, vetted, and ready for engineers to build. Before we start, engineering can be working on the previous project or a story, a spike, or setting up their environment. They can work on whatever they decide they're working on. I'm staying out of it. Also note this particular graphic shows CX tasks and UI being done together. This might be because you have a component library or design system, and while doing medium fidelity work is still important, our output will eventually be high fidelity. If your UI work is still very separate from your other CX work, like after medium fidelity interaction design, someone does the visual design, then within our sprints, CX will have its own internal assembly line. How does CX work? Show product on the sprint cadence. There are many articles with questions like, CX is planning a 6-week project. How do we show value and achievements every week or every other week to match how our company does sprints? Well, having our own 6-week cycle before engineering doing a 6-week cycle would be a great way to go. I've read about some teams doing 6-week cycles instead of 1 and 2-week sprints. So that would be great if engineering teams are trying the 6-week cycle plus 2 weeks of planning and testing between cycles, as some have reported that to be a great balance between trying to plan out too far and planning for very short amounts of time. But no matter how long the sprint or the cycle is, I just think in terms of days. Are you using 1-week sprints? When you do your CX sprint planning, consider what you can get done in 5 days. If you know your research, planning, execution, and interpretation will need 8 business days, then after 5 days, show what you did during that sprint, even if it's not completely finished. You didn't expect it to be finished. You did 5 days out of an 8-day task. And Agile Manifesto Principles remind us that the goal is to create working software on a reproducible and reliable cadence, and to be able to ship or deploy somewhere between every few weeks and every few months. So if your time estimate is reliable and you're on schedule, then everybody should cheer that after 5 days of research, you got done exactly what you expected to get done. You can put together a 5-minute update on what that is if anybody wants to hear it. I've recently seen this visualization of a model called Try-Track Agile. The strategic approach that I showed you in an earlier chapter of this workshop is a variation of this. Of course, those of you watching or listening to the podcast, you didn't see that. It was many slides ago. But I'm dropping this in here in the Agile chapter in case someone is skipping around video chapters and missed our earlier slide on project strategy from another chapter. The short version of what makes Try-Track Agile great is that it sees the CX work as happening separately from what engineering is doing. This means we don't have to be hammered into engineering's ideas of how long something should take, how it should be done, what should be done, or who does it. We don't have to fit engineering's model of how they want to do their work. We're on separate tracks. This is a good representation of what I and others recommend, and that's why earlier in the project strategy chapter, we have a much more detailed graphic on exactly how we suggest that people approach this. Um, at the top of this image, CX and UX specialists are working on research. Are we even going to build the right thing? I would imagine Agile and Lean would suggest that you not bother building the wrong thing. Approach the project strategically, do the right research to understand customers, their needs, their tasks, and what problems we'll try to solve. The middle says discovery, and that's where we're doing our architecture, design, and testing. That's right, testing our concepts and the executions of ideas before it goes into engineering's backlog. For delivery, engineering can work how they like. 1-week sprints, 2-week sprints, safe agile, Scrum, Kanban, something else, it's up to you. CX stays out of what engineering does and how they do it. Engineering stays out of your process, how we do it, and who does it. Engineering, stay out of our process, how we do it and who does it. No matter which infographic or variation you use, it's important to get your org on board with this or the other model that we showed you early in the workshop, which again, podcast people haven't seen right now. It no longer makes sense to try to hammer CX into how engineering wants to do their work. Agile's evolving, and many companies are altering variations and flavors to their team and needs. Therefore, it's impossible for us to cover the Delta CX suggestions for every Agile approach or configuration. What about 6-week cycles, Kanban, extreme programming, Scrumban, and various different approaches, flavors, and hybrids? Ultimately, these were designed for engineering, and not necessarily the set of tasks on the CX plate. But we can fit into any of these when made part of the team, a true collaborator and partner, rather than an outside consultant or someone engineers are kind of avoiding. We've got to be on the software development team, not an outside consultant, not a separate subject matter expert or an optional nice to have. We'll need to start and stay way ahead of engineering since we populate their backlog, so we should be weeks or months ahead of developers. Some people like to tell me if we're too far ahead of engineering, that's not Agile or Lean. Drop the no true Scotsman crap and join me in reality. Agile was designed for software development. Judge yourself in the Agile framework, but just don't judge CX or UX in the Agile framework. It wasn't created with us in mind, and we only somewhat fit in, so please stop hammering the square peg into the round hole. It's not the end of the world if in February I'm finished with work engineering might not get to until April. And CX and UX must be allowed to plan and estimate their own time. My next subchapter is on time, but I'll take a quick break and see what you guys have written since then. See if there's any questions or comments on that subchapter. None on YouTube. I'm going to reload LinkedIn and see if you guys have added anything there. No. Okay, maybe you're waiting for the big finish. But again, great comments from before. And again, I know LinkedIn is a couple of minutes behind where I'm broadcasting now, which is often why I tell people, please subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's more synchronous. Okay, let's go back to talking about time. That's our next subchapter of the UX and Agile presentation, and it's got some gems. This is from SAFE's page. So this is a graphic, and it shows a continuous delivery pipeline. SAFE says that this shows the flow of value through an enterprise's pipeline as they focus on new feature development. The ultimate point on this page is for SAFE to show you how you can reduce the delay between some of engineering's steps. Okay, that's engineering's business. But according to this page, feature definition, what's that, right over here? Which way do I point? Right over here. Feature definition takes 4 hours, and design takes 4 hours. And here's part of the problem with SAFE, but also many flavors of software development. We must continue to battle the false ideas that CX or UX just needs a few hours to sketch some screens, and that's product design. But more importantly, look at how detailed they break down the engineering tasks and steps while summarizing whatever CX will do into a day or less. You probably understand how many tasks and steps CX or UX might have, especially in a medium or large project, as part of the user-centered design process. SAFE shows how little they understand CX, UX, or design by having one box over here that says design. Can you imagine one box here that says engineering to represent nearly everything on this screen? Okay, great. I've circled nearly everything on this screen and I made one box called engineering. And can you imagine if this were reversed and CX got dozens or hundreds of hours to do their work and then engineering was thrown a day or two for everything they wanted to do? They'd have to start evangelizing how important good engineering is. Look, excuse me, I'm going to take a drink. Hey, CX and UX work is deep and complex. If you have dozens or hundreds of engineering hours, this feature or these stories will need 4 hours of feature definition and 4 hours of design isn't enough if you want a quality product with high customer value. So the biggest problem that I found between CX and Agile is time estimation. No matter what flavor of Agile you're using or any software development methodology, CX must be allowed to estimate their own time. Product, project, and portfolio managers should bring CX into earliest discussions so the projects have the right budgets and timelines from the start. Agile teams, or whatever you're doing, Scrum teams should include the CX teammate in planning and estimations. Non-CX teammates are often incorrect in estimating which CX tasks need to be done and how much time CX needs to do them. Now you know about user-centered design, you can see why someone from outside the CX department would be highly likely to estimate CX time and needs incorrectly. These incorrect estimations lead to interpersonal conflicts, projects appearing to be derailed or stalled by UX wanting more time, or rushing to push out a design that might still be flawed, having not received enough iterations or testing. So the main thing to remember about sprints is that CX could be agile, but CX must be well ahead of engineers. Including CX as an active part of project planning and time estimation means that teams have to stop giving CX the time left over. A project often starts with the desired release date, either because of a hard deadline or a discussion with engineering on how long they need for their processes and tasks. CX is typically told they can have the time left over after what engineering needs. Oh, engineering needs 11 weeks for something? All right, UX, you can have like a week before engineering starts and make sure you have everything ready for them so that they can get started. Sometimes I've been given 2 days on a project because Debbie just needs to sketch some screens, right? Well, hold on. This isn't agile. If UX is supposed to build everything before engineering starts, that's waterfall. CX should be planned for and planned around, not given the leftover crumbs of time and expected to create brilliance. In our go faster workplaces, when CX needs more time, we're demonized for being slow, waterfall, bloated, or not agile or lean. We are not demons because we're looking for the right amount of time to do our jobs well so that we're meeting or exceeding business goals and customer needs. We're not demons because we want someone to take our work seriously and give it proper time, headcount, and resources. Now, what if we considered closer to a 1-to-1 ratio of CX time to engineering time? Your gut reaction might be, it would take forever to release products because you're imagining a waterfall process of CX getting a huge block of time and then engineering getting the same huge block of time. But if we're not waterfall and the project's medium to large, then we don't need CX to be completely done with the entire project before engineering starts. So the real question about timing and these ratios comes back to how far ahead of engineering can CX or UX start so that we can undertake the user-centered design tasks that we strategically decide are the right choices and start populating the backlog for when developers plan to kick off their work. Therefore, Delta CX suggests that on average, CX's lead time should be in a 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 ratio to engineering's total estimate. Now, that doesn't mean we get half or a third of a time that engineering gets. This has to do with lead time. Just want to make a note for a second. Lead time. And my next slide will help us visualize that for one of those medium or larger features. Let's say we've got a large project and we're going to build the entire feature before releasing it. CX wants 12 weeks to do their work. Let's say engineering wants 20 weeks. People thinking in a waterfall way would go, oh my God, this is a 32-week project because CX has to be finished first, and then people freak out. But let's imagine how CX could be more agile. Using our 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 ratio, CX would start their 12 weeks of work at least 6 weeks before developers expect to start. So we take the 20 weeks that developers want, and we take a half or a third of that as CX's lead time. So 10 weeks would be dreamy here. That would be the 1-to-2 ratio, but we'll use the 1-to-3 ratio and imagine that UX is going to start 6 weeks before engineering. Here's a really ugly infographic on how this would look if we had, let's say, 2-week sprints. The project would end up taking 26 weeks. CX starts 6 weeks ahead of engineering. Engineering can be working on something else during that time. It could be something related to this project, like research spikes or setting up environments. They could be working on the previous feature or a fix while we're moving on to something new. Engineering can do whatever they like, as I don't get involved in how they use their time. But this would allow CX to get important research completed first. Then they'd work on the interaction design for that part of the feature, test that, and have that in the backlog for engineers to start. Then while engineering starts building that, CX can work on other aspects of the feature and move things into the backlog as they are ready. If CX runs late and needs a bit more time, we can probably get that time as long as engineering isn't running out of backlog items. If we're on time, great. We can be done and move to the next work. But we also stay available to engineering teammates in case any questions come up as they're doing their work. Sorry, I've just realized I'm missing a slide. Okay. I'm missing a slide that should come after this. Oh no, you're not going to see it. I might have to flip to something else. Now, what about the time that product managers, business analysts, and others need to do their jobs? Yes, that's got to be part of the soup as well. I'm just talking about CX and what tends to happen during and after the CX process. But yes, if there's a project that has no stories or requirements yet, and it's expected that those are created within the project timeline, we've got to take that time into consideration too. I'm not looking to short anybody's time. The entire point here is to make sure that every discipline involved in an internal or external project has their time needs taken into equal consideration and not glossed over, not guessed, and not turned into leftover crumbs. We must be more active and proactive with clients or stakeholders who are looking to reduce everything down to the fastest time frame instead of the unit of time that brings us higher quality results and outcomes. Let's talk about your own time estimation, since I find many people in UX and CX, especially those a little more junior, are not great at time estimation yet. So one quick slide about that. When estimating your time, remember that you don't get 40 hours of work in a 40-hour work week, and unrelated to the pandemic. So whether you're home or at the office, you will need to account for time spent on lunches and breaks. How about meetings inside and outside of the department? That one-to-one with your manager, those weekly department meetings, they're time you can't spend on your tasks. How about questions, ambiguities, and holes found by developers or QA who are working on something you designed some sprints back? You might find a ticket assigned to you, or you've been tagged with a question. This will also include time you might need to spend each sprint fixing old stuff. Many sprints might not be 100% devoted to new stories or features. Don't forget to account for time on planning and estimation, also possibly scoping and proposals if you deal with external clients like at an agency. And let's also remember time to collaborate with your other CX and UX teammates. If you're an architect, you'll need time to work with researchers and analysts on what they've learned and what they've found. You'll need time to work possibly with visual designers, writers, and other teammates. Now, you can estimate your work hours based on what's left in a week, but there isn't much left. This is why part of Delta CX's model calls for two CX architects working as a pair. Now, you also didn't see those slides either. Quick note to people watching the podcast. Those are slides that came earlier in this workshop about how I suggest we create teams. So just note that there is something here I'm referring to that you don't know about right now, unless you read my book. So back to the content, you can see that a work week has very little time for work, especially where our teams are not lean and suffering from too many meetings. And also remember that getting an engineering ticket assigned to you won't be a curse or something terrible throwing off your day, especially not if you planned for it, by assuming that X% of your time each week goes to conversations and collaborations with engineering. So if you're always out of time or rarely have time to get your work done, work with your manager about how you're allocated. Also make sure somebody knows how short-handed the CX team is so we can try to hire more qualified people. Now, what if someone's a bottleneck? So thinking back to that Agile team, and let's imagine that on our Agile team, there's a specialized back-end programmer, and that person is a bottleneck right now. What should we do? There are too many stories looking for that specialized programmer's specialization. Well, solutions could include pair programming, maybe some swarming, creating a skills matrix so that work could be better balanced in the future. Doesn't totally help us now. And perhaps you allow more teammates to do exploratory testing to get feedback sooner to developers. Maybe you just have to add another developer to the team to get out of this bottleneck. But do you know what isn't suggested in this scenario? We don't expect that the specialized programmer will teach his specialty to other, oh, so I've got his there. I'm sorry, that should be gender neutral. Let's write that down. Get rid of the his. Apologies, everyone. We don't expect that a specialized programmer, I had her in other places, so please don't be insulted, will teach their specialty to others on the team. I read a Scrum book that warned that UX specialists might be a bottleneck, so they should train other people to do their job. I've had business analysts tell me they make wireframes because UX is a bottleneck. I tell them to stop. Well, I studied some basic language computer programming in the 1970s, which tells me I have eyes for programming and feels for coding. Remember, the eyes and feels, they're back. Would you like to teach me some Ruby because developers are backed up with work? Should I go take a 3-day boot camp and then start coding something that'll go to production? All of a sudden, this doesn't sound like a great solution, does it? Training others to do CX's job hurts productivity, efficiency, product, and culture because CX is being told once again, anybody can do your job. Side note here, any conference session that claims it'll teach engineers to run CX research or testing or do CX design is doing CX and your customers a disservice by making non-CX roles believe that in just an hour or a few hours, you can do my job. Nobody would offer a 1-hour session on Java or Ruby at a UX conference for people who have done no coding before and would tell them that after that session, they can start doing real programming at their jobs. So, conference speakers, stop it. If we want to improve the quality of the product and certainly the culture, we must stop treating CX like it's something that's so easy to learn and do. Anybody can do it, no specialty required, maybe even no talent required. Just read a book or go hear that 1-hour talk. If CX is a bottleneck, what are some possible causes and solutions? Well, number one, CX wasn't given enough runway ahead of time to start their processes. CX is a creative and cyclical process that requires more time than engineering, product, and project managers normally want to give. The main solution here is to give CX weeks of advance time so that they're ready to deliver vetted designs when engineering is ready to start. Work with your CX practitioner or leadership to learn how long CX needs to deliver finalized designs. Bottleneck number 2, CX staff are overworked. There are too many features, fixes, or ambiguities that require our attention. Or you have some CX workers who've been given a lot of tasks or jobs to do. Maybe they're juggling research, testing, information architecture, interaction design, writing, visual design, and some front-end coding. Or they're just on too many projects. Work with CX, resourcing, allocation, or HR to make sure that others understand when we are seen as holding projects back, which is a sign that we need more CX staff. And if your company hasn't been putting the right people into CX jobs, better CX staff. Also check the Delta CX model for how we staff up for projects, the previous chapter. The concept of the CX architect paired team should help here. And number 3, sometimes CX staff struggle with their own internal or external bottlenecks. At some companies, CX designers can't do their own research or testing and must wait for specialized teammates to fit the desired research or testing into their schedules. I had this at Constant Contact many years ago. I had it at Macy's a few years ago. I was not allowed to do any research or testing for my own projects. And I remember many times at Constant Contact, I would be told, yeah, we can test your design in 3 weeks. That means I would have to wait 3 to 4 weeks to learn where my designs are flawed and require improvement. The main solution here is resourcing. If you don't want architects or designers testing, then you need way more experts on the research team so that there is no wait for testing. If they won't give you budget and headcount, then they're setting you up to fail. If you don't have people or resources to do a good job, then what? Expect lower quality? Projects take longer? Outcomes here aren't great. We must hire more qualified CX pros at all levels for our CX department and teams. Whether your company works with CX specialists as employees, contractors, freelancers, or an outside agency, the key is to hire the right number of CX specialists to do the work. There's just no replacement for this. That's the end of that subchapter. Let's see what people have asked or said during that subchapter. No, don't see anything in YouTube. Let's refresh LinkedIn. Nope, nothing there. Maybe you guys are waiting for the big end. Let's see. So moving back to slides. And again, if you guys have questions or comments as I'm going, please put them up so that I can check them. This is the last of the subchapters, even though I did just notice I am missing a few slides. So I might open those up while we talk about some of the other questions and comments you guys have. But for now, I'll finish this 5th subchapter. It's a bit of a long one, so I think I have 10, 12 more slides in here, but let's go for it. So where are businesses failing at agility? I see Agile and Scrum coaches saying that work just needs to be done. And since something getting done is better than not getting it done, it doesn't completely matter who does it, as long as it's done. That sounds like an inspirational soundbite, but let's think about the possible outcomes of that. Is it appropriate to assume that everybody has the talent, skill, and personality to do every job? If the customer's experience is bad or the product sucks, can we still congratulate ourselves for getting work done? Or as I like to say, can we still congratulate ourselves for getting the work done? We have to shift away from faster, 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 and get back to caring about quality. Being leaner by recognizing UX defects earlier and improving them before engineers code. Saving time, money, and sanity by releasing something that we already vetted, something that's less likely to interrupt work later to need a fixing or redo. When you're considering the concept and design for a new feature, would customers leave this 5 stars? Sorry, just flipping to my notes. Would customers leave this 5 stars? If not, how do we improve it now before the 4 horsemen of bad UX, registered trademark, show up? We must aim for PSE quality. Remember, PSE is products, services, and experiences. We can't just aim for, hey, look, someone is doing some work. We must be outcomes over output. Our standards must be higher than, did something get done? We must judge engineers by more than velocity, what they got done and how fast they did it. What if engineers' work could be judged by how satisfied customers are? Isn't that our number one goal and priority? How much it had to be fixed later? Less or none would be better. And how about we shift away from trying to make engineers into assembly line robots and let them be careful problem solvers? It's better to be done than to be perfect, but it's way better to be done really well. There's a grand canyon between, well, we got it done, and we spent endless time on it, so it would be flawless. To be done better, we must pay greater attention to details. We must show more care for customers' needs and realities versus let's just build what the company wants to build and people will figure it out. Great CX is about depth and quality of work, not checking wireframes off a list. What else in our lives would done be okay without done fantastically being a priority? Surgery, car repairs, haircuts. We expect quality everywhere. It's not enough for your haircut to just be done. You're going to want it to be done well. I found this graphic online, and for those not looking at the screen, it says like T-shaped people, expert knowledge as the long bar of the T, and then the short bar of the T, which also seems to have like extra octopus appendages, says good enough. I'm for the concept of the T-shape. People who have a strong expertise and expert knowledge in one area, and then they've got subspecialties or areas they're also very good at, even if they're not experts. But would you want someone without DevOps expertise deciding who is good enough at picking up DevOps work in case of a bottleneck? You would want an expert developer to decide who else on the team is good enough at coding to do some of those tasks. You wouldn't want me and my lack of coding skills deciding who's good enough at coding, right? Therefore, the only person who should determine if someone on the team is good enough at CX is a CX expert. If a non-CX expert is guessing at who is good enough at CX work and then having them do that work, that's a double disaster. And it's one we can see coming. It shouldn't be a surprise later that we have CX or UX debt because we gave CX work to a random person an Agile coach said would be good enough at doing the CX work so it could be marked as done. If it's people over process, we need to care about which people are doing which elements of the process. And you shouldn't have to learn someone else's job to keep yours. This is always one of people's favorite slides when I do my live training for non-CX workers. This is from the Department of Defense document on how to detect Agile BS. Yes, that's real. Because I can sit here and say, hey, an important part of the process is bring in UX specialists early to make sure proposed products and features have real customer value, resolve pain points, or bring something innovative and desirable. But here is a graphic from a U.S. Department of Defense document from October 2018 on how to detect BS in Agile. Since Agile has become such a buzzword and not every contractor or team promising it is delivering it. This document offers questions that help determine when a project isn't really agile and what answers to listen for. The graphic may be hard to read, but here are some of these fantastic flowchart diamonds. Are teams delivering working software to at least some subset of real users every iteration, including the first, and gathering feedback? Is feedback from users turned into concrete work items for sprint teams on timelines shorter than 1 month? And my favorite, are teams empowered to change the requirements based on user feedback? Well, of course, that's my favorite. We must change requirements, even if it means evolving or scrapping features or entire products based on the feedback of real users. That's what UX is all about. That's what Agile claims to be about. And as the flowchart mentions, oops, wrong direction. As the flowchart mentions, if the answer to any of these is no, you're getting Agile BS. So says the flowchart. Evidently, this wasn't strongly worded enough, and in August 2019, the Department of Defense came out with another document. And it says, and I'm not directly quoting it, I don't have it in front of me, under no circumstances should you do Safe Agile. I'm going to make a note to find that quote. But this is all Googleable, so you can find both the Department of Defense document on how to detect BS in Agile, and you can find their follow-up document as well. These are public, they're not redacted, and you can see this for yourself. But let's talk about that gathering feedback, since that flowchart mentioned it a bunch of times. Now, at many companies, gathering feedback tends to mean one of two things. One is we wait for customers to complain, and then we try to react to that. The other is that marketing or customer support will run satisfaction surveys, and we'll see if people are happy or not. We hope they tell the truth. We hope to learn what people think of the new feature, but that's really slow. Both of those are flawed. So let's step back to when we're first planning a project. Every project should have pre-decided goals, metrics, and KPIs. What effects do we expect these features to have? What are we measuring, and how will that be measured and proactively monitored? Let's have CX, UX, data scientists, etc., gathering and interpreting customer feedback. Don't leave it to non-CX roles. Let CX get involved. Avoid guessing, assumptions, junk science, incorrect interpretation. I'm off a click. Let me write that down. Need a click on this slide. Click. Avoid guessing, assumptions, junk science, incorrect interpretations, finding the data that says what we want, or the arrogance of we know what customers want, or customers will figure out our difficult and frustrating system. If we care about customer satisfaction, then we're researching, architecting, designing, testing, and iterating, and engineering for customer satisfaction, and then measuring it, reacting to it, and trying to predict it. If we, I just said that. So anyway, there's the matching part on the screen for those looking at the screen. I want to tell you a little bit of a story here about Disneyland and Disney World, mostly Disneyland this time. You guys know I'm a crazy obsessed Disney parks fan, especially Florida, but this story is about Disneyland. If you've ever been to a Disney park, then you've probably been on the iconic Pirates of the Caribbean ride. And if you don't, you'll just have to listen to the story anyway. But if you've been on the ride, you know that amazing moment that your boat moves past the ship, firing on El Morro, the Puerto Rican fort. But would this have been as compelling or fun if it had been a New Orleans-themed walk-through pirate wax museum? That was Disney's original idea, and they even started building a New Orleans-themed walk-through pirate wax museum. But when Walt Disney saw how popular the It's a Small World boat ride was, that would put this around 1963, they decided to redesign this ride to be a boat ride. Disney's workers were against it at first. They said, we already spent time and money building this wax museum. But the story goes that Walt didn't care. He wanted to build what people would love the most, and that's a boat ride. And the same is true for your software project. Don't release something knowing it's not quite right now and believe you'll fix it later. Think about the cost to change your mind from our previous chapter, which you didn't see. It will cost less to improve this now. And once the public sees it, the cost to change it could be more than time, money, and resources. It could mean customer service, PR people cleaning up a mess, and social media managers trying to calm people down. By the way, podcast listeners, you can also refer to the previous podcast on the Delta CX decision matrix. That is relevant here too, and in the scheme of this workshop would have come way before, so people have already heard it. Hey, it rarely gets fixed later. Let's face it, I can't think of the last time an engineering team highly prioritized fixing CX or UX debt that we knew we had before or while the project was being coded. Nobody will want to go back and work on it. We have to push ahead to cover more stories, features, or backlog. The same is true for your project. Don't continue building or, okay, hold on. That is the same line as the previous slide. Let me write that down. Repeat. So as I was saying, how not agile, not lean, and not Six Sigma is it to release something with defects, especially known defects, and have to fix it later? You know I love math. Let's do some. All right, let's say we have two projects with their own budgets. We have one budget for feature A and one budget for feature B. Let's say feature A gets built and it goes live. That money was spent. We're going to close the books on the feature A budget. Now let's work on feature B under its own feature B project budget. But while we work on feature B, the news comes in about feature A. And it's not good news. This feature is not being received well by customers. Customers are posting angry tweets, Facebook posts, LinkedIn posts, Instagram posts, TikTok posts, who knows? Social media managers are on the case. Customer support is dealing with those who met the four horsemen, people who had trouble understanding the feature or using the feature. Maybe some found UX or technical debt that kept them from accomplishing their task. Your sales department starts reporting that some customers are canceling their subscriptions or accounts. Whether we gathered this feedback proactively or reactively, it's here. Collecting and dealing with this feedback, providing support, and doing damage control cost money. This cost us money in workers we paid and business we lost. Did anybody calculate or estimate this? Let's call this number X dollars. Now, we were in the middle of feature B, but it sounds like we might have to pause some or all of our feature B team and have them fix feature A. Well, CX, UX, and product are going to be working on figuring out what's wrong because we may or may not fully understand what's going wrong. We're going to have to spin up research. CX cycles through user-centered design tasks to make improvements. We test and iterate to make sure the PSE are really good this time. The second time must be the charm. Engineering has to get these into the backlog, prioritize the work, get it done, test, and eventually release again to the public. Did anybody calculate the costs of all of these people to make all of these fixes or improvements? Let's call this Y dollars. When feature A goes funky, but we learn that, deal with that, and fix that during feature B, we probably delayed feature B. Someone might wonder, why did B take so long? Or why did B have so many failed sprints? Well, we got sidetracked rebuilding something we didn't bother building better the first time around. Someone thought good enough would be good enough, and customers didn't agree. Did anybody calculate the cost to the business due to delaying another feature or our next release? Let's call this cost Z dollars. If companies were honest about how long feature A really took because of later problems, later diagnosis, research, architecture, interaction design, testing, dev, QA, you would see X dollars to learn what's wrong, plus Y dollars to fix it, plus Z dollars to delay newer work is giant mountains of time, money, and business risk. If we want to report budgets and timelines honestly, fixing feature A, no matter when it happened, should be part of budget A and timeline A. Project A is now wildly over time, over budget, and a huge waste to the company. Adding the cost of fixing A to the project B budget, because we were working on B when the fire alarm went off, lets us deceive ourselves about the real time and financial costs of project A, because heads should be rolling. If we start accurately calculating the costs of failures and fixes and correctly associate those with the projects and budgets they relate to, companies should start to wake up to the importance of doing CX and UX correctly and thoroughly the first time. They'll start to feel the pain, and they'll see that ideas like anybody can do this work, or just go faster, or just release something and we'll fix it later, isn't agile or lean. And on that note, I'm going to send you back to my lovely face so that I can see what questions we have. And I might also try to dig up a couple of the missing slides. Thanks to people who have been watching now. We've got an hour and 20 minutes. Let's see. Anybody in LinkedIn posting something new? And then I'll check YouTube. Nothing new in LinkedIn. Thank you to the people who've stuck around this long. Martin, our friend from Naked Agility, says the instruction to avoid SAFE was in a U.S. Air Force memo and subsequent presentation. He's got a copy of both if you're interested. Yes, I found it under Department of Defense, but I think when you Google how to detect BS Agile or detect Agile BS. People will find it in Google. But yeah, you can always come to me. You can always find Martin from Naked Agility. Yes, his company's really called Naked Agility. I have met him a number of times. He does wear clothes. So don't worry. It's all very clean and appropriate. The slides that we're missing from here that are in that are hiding from me right now, and I'm going to look for them, were some slides that I tend to use to talk about I expand on why UX kind of can't design tiny pieces and just quickly throw them over to engineering. Like, oh, I'll just design this little field here and give it to engineering. And, oh, I'll just design this small piece here and give it to engineering. And about how there's a much larger arc that for us, the smallest piece isn't what an engineer sees as the smallest piece. To us, the smallest piece is typically the workflow, task, or process for the customer. Because ultimately, we have to test that as a full task, workflow, or process. So if someone is doing an e-commerce checkout, we can't just test entering the credit card and give it to the engineers. We could, but what would happen when we went to test the full process in its context? If we find it's flawed, then now we have to go tell engineering to make a change. They're going to hate us. And I had a number of slides on that, and I noticed that they are missing. So please know that there is content on that as well, but that's why these podcasts are great practice for me as I've been rewriting so many of my presentations to see what I moved around to an unknown place. Oh, there it is. What's it doing over there? It got moved. It got moved to a different chapter. Wrong. It needs to be in the Agile chapter because it helps explain why UX can't do things in some of the tiny, tiny pieces. You know, if you ever look at engineering, looking at user stories and acceptance criteria over something like a password field, it's endless because there's so many things a password field has to do and not do correctly. They can break things into such tiny pieces. Now, UX, we think in small pieces as well because we are detail-oriented, but we wouldn't design a password field and then go, it's done, and give it to engineering because it's part of a larger context. And of course, what the point that I make is same is true in engineering. Engineering has unit testing as well as integration testing. So similar to the way engineering has that, UX has to do the same thing. That's the point I normally make. And those slides were missing. Totally my fault. That's what happens when you try to redo a presentation and there's like 400 slides in the deck and you're shifting everything around. 364 slides in the deck as of now, but a few things to fix. So again, I've been running way late on this one. Thank you to everybody who stuck around live or listened to pieces of it. Those of you listening to the audio-only podcast, thank you. I would love to hear your feedback as well if you'd like to get in touch with me through deltacx.com and see where you have questions. Now, let's look back at some of the questions that we had earlier in LinkedIn and see if these are covered or if I'm going to need to maybe write more content to go in more deeply. Now, Yelena asked, what do we do when UX research capacity capacity is limited. I get asked this almost every week in my office hours. So since this keeps coming up, and since I don't specifically have a slide on it, at least not in this chapter, I'm going to write this down. Should we train others to do UX research? Because I hear this one time and time again. Maybe it was from you, Yelena, but I've been asked it multiple times during my office hours, Ask Me Anything, which is every Tuesday. And people say, gee, we're kind of short on UX researchers. My company wants to train developers. My company wants to train engineers to ask questions. My company wants to train. I often hear business analysts, or sometimes I hear product managers. And isn't that a good idea? What do we do? So I'm just going to make a couple of notes on what Yelena is asking, because it is a very common question, and I'll make sure that I build content in. But those of you who watch the podcasts know the answer. Thank you so much for that great question. Okay. And then let's take a look at what Jason said and make sure that the slides cover this, or see if there's an area where I need to make sure slides are added. The worst is architecting a solution from requirements when an agile team is already stood up to build features and begin working on sprints without regard for our discovery process. Tail wagging the dog. Dev should be downstream execution, not solutioning, unless it has to do with solving for it to. So that's a little more specific, that developers shouldn't be doing UX solutioning. And that's hard, because I do have an entire chapter in here that you haven't seen yet on collaboration. And I do try to draw the lines between where we do want to work with developers and other people on teams, but we don't want them to do our jobs. So I have a number of slides on this. I don't think, did I do this already as a podcast? Did I do collaboration versus decentralization versus design by committee? Because I have an article on that. You can Google that. I've got an article out, collaboration, decentralization, design by committee. Which one of these do we want? Which one of these don't we want? And why? So, so there is content in there, Jason, on that. I would say in the collaboration chapter, and probably in my aspirologies chapter, where I warn people about, because the target audience for this is mostly going to be CX and UX, though a little bit for everybody, but where I warn people about too many cooks in the kitchen. I love to do ideation with people, but I don't like them solution sketching and solutioning. So, Jason, hopefully what you're talking about is already in my content. UX must own the tech. Yes, I'm very much about UX autonomy. I believe I have a lot of content on that. Front-end developers think that UX is a bogus field. Doing what I can about that, and Dev don't want to be told how or what to do. Yeah, and we don't want to be told by engineers how or what to do. Their processes were designed for them. Agile designed for them. Scrum designed for them. And there's ways where we can try to plug in, but you can see it's not a perfect fit. It's not a perfect overlap. And that really ultimately the best way is to end up thinking of it in tracks where some of it fits into sprints, and some of it is just going to have to happen ahead of time, due to the very research-based nature of UX. So I'll hang around a little bit more to see if anybody else has any comments or questions on today's presentation on UX and Agile. I'll also have to check to see if I'm missing any other slides. But thank you again to everybody who watched some or all of this. It's now an hour and a half long, so that is a killer podcast. Sorry about the length, but you can see why eventually this will be a self-paced video workshop where people can digest things in chunks. Each of these sub-chapters that you saw will be its own video, so videos will generally be a few minutes to 10, 12, 15 minutes. I'm always killing bugs over here. I'm going to get you. Sorry, it's springtime. Is it springtime where you are? It's springtime where I am. Couple of indoor bugs. But thanks again to everybody for joining. Couple of quick program notes, as we have some more great podcasts coming up in the next week or two. Monday, April 20th, will be Clinical UX, puts the H in HCD with Dr. Giles. I just like to call him Dr. Giles. You know him, you love him. Tuesday, as always, is Office Hours Ask Me Anything, so start sending in those questions. Then I'm talking at some online conferences next week, so I'm not doing as much live streaming, but I shall be back on Monday, April 28th with my monster podcast on Lean UX. It'll be a format similar to this where I'll go through some of the slides that I've been putting together for my new updated workshop, and I'll stop every so often and check on some of your comments and questions, but it will be a Mongo podcast on why the Lean UX book is terrible, but CX and UX being lean is good, and how we can do that, and why the Lean UX book is neither lean nor UX. April 28th will be office hours as always, and April 29th, last podcast of April, will be good friend Michelle Ronson from CuriosityTank.com talking about UX research, resumes, portfolios, and interviews. So we've got lots of good stuff continuing to come out for you guys. As I keep saying, I know that now is a time where a lot of people do not make time to watch live streams, even live or in the archive, and all of this is archived on our YouTube channel. But I've decided I'm going to keep doing these because it's important to create a library of free content that is available when you decide you need it. So when you need it, it will be there for you. On that note, thanks again to the Delta CX friends and fans. I hope to see you all around LinkedIn. Follow me there. And please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, deltacx.tv. And with that, I think I will cue up the outro and say goodbye to everybody. And let's send it out. Thanks again. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.